What is up, everybody? Bear with us for a couple of minutes as we get the ball rolling here. Darren, you should have a co-host invite as well. Super excited today to have kind of back-to-back really good kind of panel interviews. First up, we have Alessandro Ferrari. Alessandro is head of product at Algorand. We're going to be talking about the past, present, and future of Algorand. I actually had the opportunity to go to the Python USA event. I think that was last weekend, which was really awesome to see some blockchain representation within the Python developer advocates out there. And then the second hour, we've got XDC, the foundation. We've got Fathom FI and Tyler, who has a really interesting background. He was formerly the head of digital assets within DTCC, Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, which is about as big as you can get. He's with Fathom FI right now. So liquidity protocols being built out on the XDC network. That being said, I think that we have everybody up here. Darren, how is my mic? Can we do a mic check?
Yeah, it sounds great. How's mine sound?
Sound good. Well, I think we also have Alessandro up here. Can we do a mic check real quick, Alessandro?
Mic check 1, 2, 3. How's everyone?
You sound good. So yeah, for those just joining right now, this first hour, we're going to dive deep into all things Algorand. At 12 o'clock EST, we are going to be tackling the XDC network with Fathom FI and Tyler, who is formerly head of DTCC Digital Assets. That being said, I always like to start these out with a little bit of an introduction. So Alessandro, can you tell us a little bit of your background in Web3? And I know that you've had kind of an evolution of your role within Algorand as well. If you could walk us through that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So, hello everyone. I'm Alessandro Cappellato Ferrari, and I'm head of products at the Algorand Foundation. My journey into Web3, or crypto as at the time it was known, starts in 2012. That is the first time I bought Bitcoin. Then I kind of left it on the side, always kept an eye on it. And all of a sudden in university, I was working on a project for a bank. And I saw how many intermediaries there were between when you tap the card and when the merchant actually receives the money, and how many people were banking off of that. And all of a sudden, Bitcoin clicked. I have recently joined the Algorand Foundation after being, let's say, a non-chain degen for quite some time, having done my few fair share of stints in DAOs as a DeFi researcher and all of that. I've joined the foundation as the head of developer tooling because my background is in software engineering. I then turned more into product management. So this was the perfect combination of my two passions and my two major skills in my career. And I am now head of product, overseeing product for the foundation. So it starts with developer tools, but it's a bit more broader.
Awesome. And I know you guys have had quite the interesting journey through Algorand. So, I mean, I'd love if you could maybe give us an overview of that development history, where you guys are at right now in the current state versus the future, and maybe walk us through how some of the network innovations are contributing to additional or where you see additional developers onboarding and what that experience looks like. I know that there's like incentives and things like that coming up, but I guess the journey traveled thus far and where you guys feel like you're going as far as additional developer onboarding and the experience that developers are going to have.
Yeah, we soon realized that most of the developers are in the Web2 world. If we're talking simply numbers, there are over 10 million Python developers. And I don't think the crypto industry, the Web3 industry, has more than 50,000 developers. So when I joined the foundation, we said, okay, we need to make the experience as Web2-like as possible. At the end of it, the Web2 developer experience has a 20-year head start on us. So let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's make it as friendly as possible for the biggest batch of developers there is out there. And so we started with AlgoKit. a year and a bit ago, to one of the biggest issue developers face is creating new projects and setting up their development environment. So with the first version, we focused extremely on that. We then moved on to look at the core of programming, which is how you write smart contracts on chain. What we had worked, but it was kind of difficult. So if you are a developer, usually if something doesn't work or you don't understand it within 15 minutes and you're not too invested in it, you're going to drop off onto the next one. So if I want to try blockchain and in 20 minutes I'm not up and running, realistically, I'm moving on to another blockchain and never look back at it again. So the idea behind Python, and that we released in March, was to meet developers where they are. Python is now the standard programming language that people learn in university. All of the CompSci 101 courses are on Python now. Python is easy. If you know English, you're halfway there because it's fairly similar. So that is what we did and how we're trying to attract developers. It's by making it so simple and so similar to what they're already used to that it just becomes the logical next step.
Have you seen an uptick in developer activity since the Python implementation? And like, is there any websites that show accurate analytics and statistics? Oftentimes we see biases with the analytics sites.
That is an excellent question. So we have seen both an uptick in numbers and in quality of projects. So since the Python launch, we've had over 1,500 students register for bootcamps. This is an astonishing number. I didn't expect such a good reception. But we've also seen the quality and the size of the dare a developer is willing to take increase. With a language that is difficult and has a lot of gotchas, you're not as confident in your skills as you are with something you know. So all of a sudden we saw people saying, yes, I'll do from A to B. And now they're moving, let's do from A to B to C all the way to Z. So we also saw an increase and an improvement in what developers want to build. And with regarding to analytics, this is an extremely difficult question. For generic Algorand related analytics, I usually use Nodely. You can find it at tps.nodely.io. I also appreciate and respect the effort that ChainSpect is trying to make. We might not see eye to eye always, but at the end of it, they have set forward a methodology on which everybody counts on how they count everyone's transactions, and yeah, at least they're making a clear effort. So I'd like to give them a shout out for this.
Yeah, I'll have to maybe I'll send you guys an intro on the side, but we know a guy that just started kind of the analytics firm called ChainStats, and Tokenizer does a really good job. And then Brian from Santiment always seems to do some, and the Santiment team seems to do some good work around some of the analytic stuff too, if you guys haven't heard of them. But I was going to ask you guys what separates Algorand from other layer ones such as Ethereum and Solana. And perfect timing. You guys, I saw a commercial this morning that you guys kind of did on the back end of there was a Solana commercial that came out maybe a couple of months ago, and you guys just did one from Algorand. That's, I think it's like should have bought or should have paid with Algorand. It's a bunch of people in a grocery store going through checkout, and the one individual is trying to, nothing against other networks. I mean, from our end, but one guy's trying to check out. And he's like, oh, my God, I only bought 3 things. And why is it saying it's $86? And it's like, well, that's the gas fee there. And then the other guy is trying to pay with Bitcoin. He's like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait here for like 57 minutes until your train. And then on Solana, and I think that's John Woods is playing the actor for trying to pay with Solana. And he just keeps failing his transaction. But I would love, Alessandro, if you can maybe walk us through from your standpoint, the developer advocacy stuff, what really does kind of separate Algorand from other layer ones?
Yeah, as the commercial highlights, which, by the way, I'd like to praise our community for it, because the idea has been crowdsourced. The idea comes for that commercial comes from the community, and a lot of the actors in there are from our community. So we want to involve the Algo fam as much as possible. What separates Algorand from the other chains? It's efficiency, so cost effectiveness compared to some chains like Ethereum, but mostly, and this isn't highlighted enough in the current state of the industry, is the instant finality. If we want to achieve mass adoption, you cannot allow a customer to leave until the transaction is settled. So if you have chains that have transactions that fail, that creates an issue. If you have blockchain hype battles, all of a sudden, 15 minutes later, all of a sudden that transaction disappears. You cannot have that. So if you're trying to achieve a mass adoption, and you want to bring in real world usage of blockchains, instant finality, single slot finality is the most important thing, and is the key differentiator between Algorand and all the rest.
Darren, I know. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so I was wondering, like, what were some of the challenge points when developing AlgoKit 2.0 and integrating native Python smart contract coding?
Well, the biggest challenge was actually keeping Python native, meaning as always, we try to think through who are our customers, who we are trying to target. And if you are a company that focuses all of their stack on Python, if we make the integration native, it works out of the box with all of your tools. This led us to think hard on some trade-offs and see how we could make it really good and flow really nice. But all of a sudden, the pros and benefits from Python being native, so not us creating new shiny things, is that you can integrate it in your Python backend seamlessly, and you can run unit tests on that. It's just another piece of the puzzle. So this was the main and biggest challenge, but I'm glad we pushed forward with this ideology, because it's been proving extremely useful.
Yeah, I was really kind of interested and I'm glad that I saw the tweet like a week ago with Python USA, which was like really close to my house actually, and drove down there, and there's tons of developers and tons of people voting on Python, but then you guys were the singular soldiers there representing kind of the blockchain space. So I guess I've got to ask, where do you from Algorand's standpoint, you obviously see a market opportunity here with Python, and maybe just if you could educate our audience a little bit just on some of the foundations in AI with Python, what that looks like, and then where you guys kind of see that fit. I mean, I had the ability to interview a couple of the developers that you guys had there or talked to. It seems like you can really kind of simply like launch, kind of native modular blockchain aspects through Python, like really easily. But maybe just give us kind of the overview of where you guys see the market opportunity, kind of being first natively within Python, and then what are some of the cool things you expect people will be able to do on Python, since you guys are kind of, that's the I'm going to mispronounce it, but the new canon of coding language that Algorand's using.
Yeah, canon is perfect. So first and foremost, I was surprised that we were the only blockchain at PyCon. To be fair, a lot of developers, standard developers, still haven't caught the blockchain bug. So at PyCon, we saw some people interested. They were like, yeah, but crypto, it's pump and dumps, it's meme coins. What can I actually do useful there? And all of a sudden, when you explain the powers of blockchain for what they're building, because blockchains are immutable and safe and secure, so you can you can rely on blockchain to reduce operational risk. When you speak to developers in this kind of language, then all of a sudden they can understand. The zero time downtime that we have also is extremely helpful, because every developer knows that software falls apart and there are many issues on that. But the opportunity that we see is that it's just Python. The AI movement has brought new life into Python, not only from a web perspective and data analytics perspective. Now you have some of the most brilliant minds in computer engineering working in AI, and they know Python, so that you need to post a proof of your ML model, and without releasing it, all of a sudden you can use a blockchain for that, because blockchain is uncensorable. You cannot tamper with it, and so you can prove that you have solved something without actually revealing the secret sauce. And integrating with the language that your entire company uses, that makes it just that more easy.
So what new developments are you most excited about?
So as we are trying to bridge the gap between the Web3 industry and normal Web2 industry, we have noticed that there are a lot of things that our industry just recreated simply because there is no specific reason. One of the biggest developments that we have, and I cannot wait for people to actually try a stable version out, is liquid authentication. With this, we are taking the approach of not your keys, not your crypto, but for interacting with blockchains. So all of a sudden on Ethereum, you have like Wallet Connect. Wallet Connect is a middleman. This industry was built because middlemen shouldn't exist. You shouldn't have to trust someone. What happens if you get blacklisted on Wallet Connect? All of a sudden, you cannot use all of the protocols that you currently use. So with Liquid Auth, we are removing the middleman from interacting with the blockchain. And this is, from an industry standpoint and from an Algorand standpoint, it's an extremely important thing. It's something I don't think many end users will notice at first, but it's something that as an industry we need to get behind together and push forward with it, simply because it's about resilience.
Yeah, I'm interested too when you think about a really interesting point, by the way, by saying that we tend to see all the time in this space that there's like things that have already existed that just work for decades that are just kind of reinvented on blockchain for these. Here's the new killer app use case, but it's like already been around for like decades. And I'm curious, like with a liquid authentication and removing the middleman, that's got to tie into like actually making sure that digital identity aspects are totally nailed. I would assume, at least, right?
Exactly. And the way that Liquid Auth works is following standards that are set forward, that first and foremost exist and have existed for at least 10 years and are widely adopted. You can see that now every platform is moving, instead of asking you for a password, it's asking you for a passkey. Liquid Auth uses the same technology. So eventually your wallet can move from just holding your crypto or your NFTs to holding your digital representation of your driver's license, to hold your passkeys for a two-factor authentication. And this is only possible if you use the same standards, because we are the small guys here as the crypto industry, and the Web2 industry is the big guy. We need to adapt in order to gain adoption, and we won't gain adoption if we create standards. So all of this is, I cannot wait for it, because with the rise of digital identities, all of a sudden your wallet and your keys and your crypto will play an ever more important role in your life. And that's how you enact the Trojan horse attack and get blockchain into the hands of everyone.
Yeah, I think you're leading us into impacts on impacts on society as a whole here. Like it's always interesting being in this space. It seems like this space is so huge and there's so much adoption, but when you really kind of look out, and it's honestly like even the Python summit, whenever I came down there and like we were sitting down and eating, and there was a guy that was like, so what do you do? And I'm like, oh, we do media and blockchain. And he's like, blockchain? He, he's like, is that still kind of a round type thing? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, 100%. But I mean, if you look at adoption, and I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit, like, can you maybe just give your insight or your opinion on where we're kind of going and how society's actually going to be impacted by this technology?
So I have two different thoughts on this. One is the more romantic way I envision it. That is, I joined in 2012 this industry. I hold the cypherpunk ideology near and dear, and I still have in my mind the dream of everyone is hosting their own node. All of the transactions go through their own node. But it's difficult for this to come to existence. If we look at it from a more pragmatic way, blockchain can replace the social fabric and the social infrastructure of society, in my opinion, by simply removing the middlemen. If you pay with blockchain, all of a sudden the experience is the same for the end user. They won't realize that they're using blockchain, but all of the process from payment to merchant will be 10 times more efficient. You can still use your banking interface if you really want to, but instead of taking 10 days to go from Italy to Japan for a bank transfer, it can move in 2.8 seconds because it settles instantly. There are no middlemen. You don't have to jump through and pay 6 different banks for your bank transfer to move through. So there are two ways I see blockchain in society in the future. One is we're all self-hosted, and the other is we don't even realize we're using it.
So what do you see as the most critical innovation that Algorand has brought to the blockchain space, and where do you see those contributions going to in the future?
So one of my favorite innovations brought forward by Algorand is state proofs. We are not, as an industry, paying that much attention to quantum computers and how quantum computers can break all of the basic cryptography that we hold and we use daily without even knowing. State proofs are a way to to quantum proof the history of the blockchain, so that every roughly 50 minutes we post a state proof that assures the history of the blockchain, so it cannot be tampered in the case of the rise of quantum computers. This is something that is really forward thinking, and I applaud the Algorand Technologies team to have developed this thing. So this is my favorite, to be honest.
I gotta ask, as far as we look at all these different ecosystems, all these different layer ones, and everybody's tackled decentralization a little bit differently. I mean, you can think where, you could argue where Bitcoin, really kind of excelled as far as decentralization early on. And then you look at who controls hash power and all the other stuff, and you really got to think, is it really decentralized now? And then you look at other ecosystems where they're decentralizing more over time. From Algorand's standpoint, what measures have you guys kind of put in place right now as far as where you guys are at decentralization wise, and how do you kind of envision that decentralization moving forward to make sure that kind of everything's spread out, which is actually really kind of topical because of the Fit 21 stuff that just kind of came out yesterday and everything else. I would love your take on it.
Yeah. So, well, if you look at Bitcoin, if you somehow manage to take over F2 pool, probably the Bitcoin protocol isn't as solid as we actually think of it. But with regards to Algorand, I am eager to see consensus incentives and peer-to-peer communication live later this year. So we have noticed that some of our critics were saying Algorand is permissioned because we have relay nodes Relays are just simply another type of node that it's an information superhighway that sends all of the transactions faster around and in a more efficient way. We have decided, okay, let's remove our reliance on relay nodes and let's bring a change to the network topology to peer-to-peer. So every node is a normal node and communicates with the rest of the network. But to ensure a healthy and safe and secure release of peer-to-peer, we also had to change a bit of the protocol economics in it of itself. Meaning, if you want to run a node, it's an expense that you take, and you are securing the network with your stake. That is the basis of proof of stake. And we didn't have consensus incentives. So if currently you propose a block on Algorand, you don't get paid for it. We noticed this and thought that we should amend it. So I am looking forward for consensus incentives where this will change and it will usher forward a new era for Algorand as a fully decentralized and permissionless network that any of the critic can't now criticize.
So Algorand has been involved with some real-world applications and partnerships. Can you highlight some key collaborations and their impact on the adoption of Algo?
Yes. So one collaboration and partnership I'm extremely excited of is the UNDP. So we are training and teaching the United Nations staff and members on the benefits of blockchain, because we live in a privileged situation. We all have access to credit. There are banks, but a lot of people in the world don't have access to credit. And blockchain being permissionless, you can access money and transact digitally without the need for a bank account. And this creates a credit history. If done well, this can create a credit history that then can give you access to the banking system. And this is why I'm extremely hyped about the United Nations partnership. And switching on to real world application, the most wonderful use case, in my opinion, of real world applications assets that we have is TravelX. How many times did you have to unfortunately change a plane ticket, and how much did it cost you?
Yeah, I mean, when I came back from Consensus last year, I don't know if anybody went down there, but there was a big storm, and I know a lot of the plane flights got delayed and switched. I had to change my flights 3 times, and I think it was like $1,200 extra to get home or something crazy.
Exactly. If I happen to know that I'll miss a flight, I need to contact the airline, pay a changing flight fee, pay the difference in flight, and this shouldn't happen. With TravelX, they have onboarded, I think, 3 to 4 airlines. There is a secondary market. They issue NFT tickets, NFT plane tickets. That means that you own the ticket, and if you cannot make it, you can simply post it, and you can sell it to someone else. This is a wonderful use case for blockchain because it removes the necessity to have an intermediary, and you take control over the ownership of the asset. In this case, a plane ticket. If I want to gift a plane ticket to someone, it'll be under my account. It's a mess. With TravelX, nope, you just simply send them the NFT and they can fill in their information and they're good to go. Yeah, this is something that it's groundbreaking in my opinion, and I cannot wait for people to realize how important this is.
Yeah, think about, I mean, even to take it a step further, like think about delays, and then you're literally in midair. How many times do you have a transfer at an airport, and you're literally like just looking at the clock 40 different times to be like, I'm not going to make this transfer flight. There's no way. But you're also, but you're literally on Wi-Fi in the airplane, and there's nothing that you can do about it. You basically just have to get off the plane and then try to run to the next terminal or run to the next gate to make your flight. Instead of that, just literally, if you know you're not going to make it, I mean, just log on. You would have the option to then just basically sell your ticket to somebody else that might not have, the ability to get home or do X, Y, and Z while you're still in air.
Exactly. That is the promise of blockchain as a critical piece of infrastructure. All of a sudden, by having true digital ownership of what you're buying, you can freely do with it whatever you want. And this is something that currently in this current meta of there's a lot of meme coins going on, which everyone loves some meme coins. But in the long run, the blockchain adoption will not come through meme coins, but it will come with these use cases where you can noticeably see a quality of life improvement in your daily life.
Yeah, that's it. The meme coin stuff's always interesting to watch. I mean, it is. As a kind of sidebar here, I mean, because you've been in this space for a while, I think that there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from things like meme coins, as far as like what kind of power in community and pooled community can actually kind of accomplish. But then you have to take the other end of the spectrum and be like, look, if we want real adoption and we keep having these incredible boom and bust cycles, it's almost like, one step forward and two steps back for like industry to like actually trust what's going on and the fundamental technology here. I'm just curious your thoughts on how the stuff intertwines, because there are lessons to be learned from this. But from what
the power of the mimetic culture is equal to none. Nothing gets everyone rallied up as much as a meme, and we know it. We're the internet generation, so it's important to harness this, but to harness it responsibly. Meaning we are fighting as an industry for relevance and to be recognized as an actual industry and be taken seriously. So I love memes and I love everything, but we should learn how to harness the mimetic power and the Web3 culture while still leveraging blockchain for more, let's say, infrastructure reasons and infrastructure adoption. But the Web3 culture reigns supreme, and I still love it. I am packed with NFTs, love DeFi. The freedom that it enables, it's equal to none.
I think one thing we're seeing recently, and then we'll get into some goals and objectives here looking forward, is on that topic and the power of kind of culture and pooled culture and things like that. I think we're seeing a shift, especially over like the past handful of months, on both, not to get like political for the sake of being political here, but on both ends of the spectrum, we're seeing like a kind of a political push because there's obviously elections and things like that coming up. Have you guys kind of engaged with, not political aspects, but with candidates? Because I feel like that's a huge kind of thing going on right now. And obviously candidates on both end of the spectrum are mainly just trying to get numbers and views and clicks and likes. I've seen politicians put laser eyes on their profiles and everything else. But I'm curious your thought process on it. I mean, at the end of the day, we need politicians to be backing the technology. I'm just curious your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think we haven't engaged personally with any candidate. My personal belief is that blockchain is just a piece of technology, extremely important and extremely powerful if harnessed right. So it should be an apolitical decision made consciously, but of course it's election year, so there will be candidates that harness the crypto electorate people and will try and leverage that to gain a seat.
Yep, I agree. Darren?
Yeah, I just want to know your thoughts on the patchwork of interoperability between different networks and ecosystems.
Yeah, so Realistically, how blockchain gets adopted is through a multi-chain world. So interoperability is a must, in my opinion. We have recently joined and co-founded with Hedera the DREC Alliance. This is a project and an alliance that is developing a way to decentralize for decentralized recovery of keys in a way that I select 4 or 5 friends and tell them, hey, if for 2 days you don't see me online, you'll have the ability to reconstruct my keys and be sure to save them. So if I lose my phone and I haven't stored my secret key somewhere, after those 2 days pass, I reach out to those friends, and all of a sudden I can get my keys back. This is an really important step towards adoption, because how many times in your life have you clicked on, I forgot my password?
I just did it yesterday.
Exactly. Imagine if your entire net worth is behind it. How sweaty are you? Initiatives like the Decentralized Recovery Alliance are the first initiatives that will bring forward a new wave of adoption, because it lowers the barriers of entries and reduces risk. So the future is multi-chain. Algorand is amazing at transacting because of its instant finality and speed. There are other networks that are better at NFTs or DeFi because they have more composability. There are other networks that have better storage solutions like Cross Network or Arweave. There is no one-trick pony, so we need to work together and build bridges with each other, quite literally. Maybe using state proofs, because state proofs would be an excellent way to bridge in a trustless manner. But we need to bridge between networks and be sure that the interoperability and we can deliver a seamless user experience for the end user by interoperating with different networks altogether.
Yeah, I'm curious too, like to take the for those that are listening that might not be aware of what DREC is as one example, but Decentralized Recovery Alliance, which I know that's a lot of the kind of initial work with Dr. Lehman Baird from Hedera and Algorand and Swirlds Labs and the H-Bar Foundation kind of bootstrapped out that initiative as founding members. And then recently we see Ripple join and Constellation join and Casper join and XRPL Labs join. When you look at kind of meaningful interoperability, because I kind of side with where your head goes here, Alessandro, where it's like it has to be meaningful. Certain networks are going to interoperate for certain different things. The importance of like open standards, and then getting down to like one of the I think core levels of like red tape for the entire industry is like the onboarding experience and the wallet experience. Like, how do you envision that maybe changing over time? As because this ties directly into that user experience at the wallet level, the key level. Like, do you envision that you're going to have 40 or 50 different wallets like in 10 or 15 years? Or do you think that there's going to be something that kind of is driven on an open standard and everything kind of seamlessly flows together?
Hopefully it's driven by an open standard, to be honest, because imagine having to find the key if you have 50 different wallets. It's ludicrous. We are working on something that is called HD wallets. So it's a way to standardize things even forward. And because Algorand has a different secret key path than other chains, so we recognize ourselves that have in the past we thought differently, but to ensure interoperability, you need to abide to the standards. So with HD wallets, like on EVM chains, on MetaMask, you can simply add a new network and you'll have the same address because it's derived by the same private key. you will be able to do so even with Algorand. So all of a sudden, you can have the same private key and use it on all different wallets. Then this is an industry built on top of cryptography. So private and public key cryptography, you will still need a private key. How that private key is stored and maintained, I think there can be some improvements there, and we will have to figure those out to ensure mass adoption. But we cannot remove the need for a private key.
Darren, go for it.
So there's wider industry trends now, and industry trends in the future, relationships and network efficiencies. What are your thoughts about these different trends like tokenization, ESG, social finance?
Tokenization is probably the trend I'm mostly looking forward to, because it democratizes access to financial instruments. Currently in TradFi, you have access to financial instruments based on your income and your net worth. So the more money you have, the more you have access, and the more you get proposed different financial instruments. By having them on the blockchain and with the possibility to fractionalize those assets, those tokenized assets, all of a sudden, more people can have access to better savings mechanisms. So I'm extremely keen on real world assets and tokenization. Just imagine if you can invest in a money market fund without having to go to your bank, or you can simply settle the fact that you're buying some bonds without paying for an extremely expensive middleman. That's why Algorand has atomic swaps, so that you can nest different transactions that either every transaction goes through or none of them go through. This is how you remove a middleman, and this is probably one of the most important features for real world assets, because it removes expenses and operational risks. You don't have to wait from when you send the bank transfer to when you receive the asset in uncertainty. It's either done altogether or it isn't done.
I'm curious from your stance, like looking at, I want to go back to Python a little bit and industry trends, and how. Well, I guess one thing is just a quick stat. Like we did an interview with the Nextera guys a couple of months ago, and Matai from Nextera was talking about how like they went to the Plug and Play Summit, and there's like 6,000. Or it was one of the statistics is there's like 6,000 AI startups in 2024, which is a crazy high number of AI startups. But then you like dig into like machine learning and AI and how much of that leverages Python. Do you think that like this is like do you expect to see kind of a lot more use cases built out on Algorand that do deal in AI? I guess the reason I'm asking is like, I think one of the things that we hear of all the time in this space is that all these legacy institutions and all these companies are just going to rip and replace all of the infrastructure that they've built and replace it with blockchain. Where the other end of the spectrum is, they need to be able to plug and play into a network that works, and then leverage blockchain as like a value add. Is there a huge market opportunity for AI, for machine learning, for the Internet of Things stuff? Like now that you guys are kind of natively Python?
Yes, most definitely. We have some announcements coming on the Internet of Things side that are coming, but I cannot spoil. But yeah, the amount of money that is being put on AI currently is something incredible. There are so many new startups that are building, and once they realize that they need to be publicly in check, because with AI now you start seeing people calling for regulation. You may be in favor or not in favor. The risk of AGI, we've all seen rise, Terminator and everything. So we are all scared about where AI can go. So once they will have to publicly prove what they do, blockchain will be the inevitable choice. And so having it with Python, it means that every company that on an AI, every startup that develops AI can seamlessly integrate with Algorand. They can. So it's just another piece of the puzzle. So in the whole picture, they add blockchain, they start posting transactions, they reduce operational risk, all by having the same developers. Just learn how to develop on the AVM and you're good to go. It's the same language, it's the same tools.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that if you look at, so obviously the killer app moment for, I mean, because AI has been around for decades too, but if you look at the killer app moment for AI, you know, I don't think there's any way to argue it was OpenAI and ChatGPT.
Yeah.
But then if you take it a step further, which is what I think you're alluding to here, is that, and this is something I always think about when using something like ChatGPT, is like, okay, it's great that it's putting these outputs whenever I trigger it and ask it a question. However, what's in the actual model? You know, that's what are the inputs that whenever I type in a question, like what are the inputs baked in so that when I type in a question, it gives me an answer? And are those inputs baked into the AI at the core level over time going to lead me to think in a certain way or act in a certain way, even with the slightest of changes? It's like the social dilemma stuff that, you know, Facebook and Google and all this other stuff. But you take it a step further in the power of AI, which it can get really scary. So then you think about like, okay, I mean, I would love maybe your take on that as far as like decentralized or federated AI, and what something like Algorand could represent. And I think you talked about it at the very beginning, which is, okay, you have these ML proofs, and you can literally test them right on blockchain, like the transparency aspect for AI models. I would love your thought process on that just a little bit.
Yeah. So there is the meme, what did Ilya see with regards to OpenAI? And Sam Altman has always said that he wants to find a way for OpenAI to be publicly governed by the entire population. That, to me, sounds like a DAO, by the way. So realistically, they're already thinking about blockchain, in my opinion, without saying it out loud. But the need for, I don't want to come off like a doomer, because I think AI will transform our lives and not destroy it. The internet and encryption of websites didn't destroy our lives like many people thought, but it actually allowed us to make payments online. So I think AI will be transformative in that way as well. But there needs to be something and some safeguards in place everywhere, just as it's to foster responsible innovation. So with AI, it's the same thing, but it's even more powerful. So posting ML proofs, being sure that nothing is running foul, that is what blockchain is for. Blockchains are immutable, untamperable, and everyone can verify. This is the secret sauce. So I think a marriage between AI and blockchain will be extremely important and relevant in the future. And that's why we started with Python.
Yeah, being able to trace all of the inputs to the outputs, right? So if there's anything that goes wrong, you'd be able to go right back to where the wrong input is. But I wanted to know, looking ahead, what are the primary goals and objectives for Algorand over the next few years, and how do you envision the network will evolve as blockchain becomes mass adopted?
Well, this is an excellent question, because with consensus incentives and the switch to peer-to-peer, we are at a huge turning point for the Algorand network, because all of a sudden the network security will be rewarded. So I envision more people running nodes, the network being more decentralized and therefore more secure, because that is why you're running nodes, to secure the network at the end of it. My vision for Algorand is that real world adoptions comes through us, by us adopting commonly used standards and making it simple, like we did with AlgoKit for developers and Python, making it simple for traditional companies to integrate blockchain in their stack, because all of the security measures and all of the way you interact with the blockchain is something that your IT, compliance, and security department already knows and already uses. So this is how I envision us in the future, and the work that we have been doing for the past 2 years, and we are still doing, because we have a few other languages coming, always with the core principles of being semantically compatible so that you can interact and integrate seamlessly with your stack. A few other languages are coming. With this, consensus incentives, peer-to-peer, I think the future is bright. If you want to develop on a chain that even if there are 5,000 transactions per second, nobody notices, we have our community that loves stress testing mainnet, and all of a sudden I was buying an NFT. It all went well. I checked back and we were doing 5,000 transactions per second. No other chain has done that. So if you want to build on technology that scales, and if you want to ensure the quality of your data and security of your practices, just build on Algorand. It's an easy choice.
Yeah, I'm curious, kind of as we ramp down here, and we certainly appreciate your time today, Alessandro, but we had an interesting interview a couple months ago. I think it was, Darren, I think it was with the ex-chief enterprise architect at Coca-Cola, and I can't remember if it was Eric or Alan, and he was mentioning with like the adventation of like the internet, and when companies started coming on the internet and doing things, they were almost being like made fun of or like mocked from other companies. And the example he gave was Pizza Hut, oddly enough. He's like, after the internet kind of started up and you first started seeing companies on, one of the first companies from like a marketing or branding standpoint that did anything was Pizza Hut. And they created one of the first like mailing lists or email lists. And all their competitors were like laughing, being like, what the hell are they doing? An email list for all this stuff. And then I think it was I want to say American Express, but I might be wrong. American Express integrated payments. And all of a sudden, Pizza Hut had tens of thousands of email subscribers, and they had a direct inroad into payments with those subscribers. Where taking that as maybe an example with where we may be at right now with the adoption of blockchain, I mean, what do you think as far as like just one thing that kind of has to come about as like a killer app, or how early we might be as far as the adoption of this technology, and where you think we're going as a whole with this industry in the future?
I think a lot of companies are ready to adopt blockchain, but there is a lack of regulation that makes it difficult for them. At the end of it, a lot of companies do what their compliance departments allow them to do. So I think it's by behaving and maturing the industry and allowing time for the regulators to actually take a look seriously at blockchain. What happened yesterday is the first of, I hope, many bills going through where finally the US government has to have a say on blockchain and start taking it seriously. I think it's mostly this because a lot of companies are starting to use it, to use blockchain for its pros. Something on Algorand, we have WholeChain, that is a blockchain-based traceability solution. This, for example, from a compliance point of view, is extremely important because if one of your suppliers doesn't meet ESG requirements and you're selling your product as an ESG company, you are responsible for it. So there is people have understood blockchain both from a transactional point of view and also from a traceability standpoint. What we need is regulatory clarity so that people can safely start onboarding blockchains as their current stack.
Well, we certainly appreciate your time today, Alessandro. Where can we go to learn a little bit more about the work that you are doing within Algorand? And, obviously, for people that are looking to learn more, they can follow the foundation, they can follow the developer account, but where can we go to learn more about, your direct contributions within the ecosystem?
So, well, I'm fairly active here on Twitter. I'm at Loden _. Otherwise, you can see a lot of my contributions on the GitHub. Everything that we do is out in the open. We like to build in public. We like to involve our community as soon as possible. But developer.algorand.org is where you will learn and get to know the wonderful world of Python on Algorand and AlgoKit. Algorand.foundation is our company websites. There are more traditional style blogs to understand what we're doing and how we're approaching things. But yeah, otherwise, Twitter, just DM me. My DMs are open. I'm happy to hop on a call or talk with everyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alessandro, for coming today. Want to give a shout out to Joanna for helping us to put this together and schedule this. This is the second Algorand interview that we've done. The first one was a joint one with John Woods and Dr. Lehman Barrett. Alessandro, we look to have you back again in the near future, and looking forward to all the awesome innovation coming out of the Algorand ecosystem. Thank you so much.
Happy to join anytime. Thank you for hosting me, and have a great day.
All righty, guys. We're going to shift to the next segment here in just a minute. Super excited to have the XDC Foundation coming up alongside Tyler Carter. He's at Desync now and Fathom FI. Tyler was previously head of digital assets at DTCC, so the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. We might get a little bit into the derivatives market aspects here because I know Darren and I have some real interest in this. We used to do deep dives all the time into this stuff. And we've also got Quincy Jones, the man, the myth, the legend, software developer at XDC Foundation, and Lance Lilly coming up as well, ecosystem development within the XDC ecosystem. So bear with us for a second, guys, and we will get started. I have invites to the foundation account, to Fathom, as well as Quincy. Yeah, that was a pretty interesting one, Darren. Getting into the weeds with like the Python stuff and going to that summit and just seeing all the developers, but not really seeing anything blockchain related was really kind of eye-opening to me, at least.
Yeah, I used to use Python for like 3D animation. So like a lot of the 3D applications, like you can have scripts in Python like to simulate water, or simulate fire, or just like a walking cycle or something like that. So I know Python's widely used, so it was smart to integrate that with Algorand.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get deep into the weeds here with XDC Foundation. Super excited to have Tyler Carter up here. Tyler is founder at Desync, as well as Fathom FI. Fathom Protocol is a comprehensive DeFi platform that provides liquidity solutions to retail and institutional participants. Users that are utilizing Fathom can deposit XDC and staked XDC to mint FXD. Which is a USD stablecoin, and then can be used to leverage exposure to yield opportunities, real-world asset vaults, trade finance pools. So we're really going to get into the weeds here with kind of the converging of traditional financial infrastructure and Web3 financial infrastructure. Tyler, really appreciate you joining us today. We always like to start these out with a little bit of an intro. So if you could tell us maybe just a little bit of yourself. We're going to get into some more maybe detailed questions with your background here because it's really interesting. Yeah. But intro of yourself and tell us maybe just an overview of Fathom. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, sounds good. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, sounds good. So nice to meet everyone. Tyler Carter here, co-founder at Desync Labs, and then one of the original founding members of the Fathom DAO as well. So I guess I'll start maybe backwards to front, going through my crypto journey, but that started for me in 2012. Was just like an econ nerd, was reading a lot about the US and global financial system. Any one of the books that I was reading, kind of insinuated that the dollar-based system was coming to an end, but no one talked about what was next. So, pretty much took a year off of work and decided to go find what was next and found Bitcoin. So good timing. And then was able to also become a beta tester of the integrated DEX that was on Ripple's XRPL. They sunsetted it, but that's actually recently come back live. But yeah, that existed in 2012. So yeah, one of the earliest DEX tests, I think the earliest that existed. And then spent about 8 years in the ETF business after 2012 at one of the biggest index providers, and eventually built and ran their digital asset group. And that started in about 2017 or so. We ended up doing like 6 industry firsts when I ran that group. We tokenized the first indices with Securitize. We did the first risk-controlled ETFs that were traditionally listed for Bitcoin and Ethereum. We did the first large cap crypto index. And then probably the coolest one actually just got approved 2 years after registration. That was the first multi-asset traditional ETF that was both crypto and equities. So it's a hybrid or a split exposure Bitcoin and S&P 500. So on the heels of S&P, I was pretty much pivoted from, traditional crypto ETFs to seeing the future of tokenization. If anyone's heard any big asset managers sort of talk about this progression from mutual funds to ETFs being a technological progression and then moving from ETFs to tokenization, I mean, that's literally my script that was developed at S&P to pretty much convince, not only S&P, but asset managers that were joining us to join the tokenization train. So from there, went to one of the biggest tokenization firms, Securrency. When we were there, we did the first 13 SEC-approved tokenized securities. I was their head of digital assets, and then Securrency got bought by DTCC. That was all sort of taking place last year. When they were getting bought by DTCC, we were pretty much already building Fathom, although it wasn't branded. I, along with the 2 other co-founders of Desync, Anton, who was head of blockchain engineering, and then Manuel, who was head of DeFi, we're pretty much trying to solve the tokenization problem. And when I say tokenization problem, I'm pretty much talking about the lack of utility for tokenized real-world assets. And I'm also talking about the lack of distribution for tokenized real-world assets. So there's, to date hasn't been any real utility, and then no one's connected buyers and sellers yet. So, we called this the DeFi as a distribution channel, was sort of what we were trying to achieve. We didn't really feel like, maybe a massive entity like DTCC was the best place to work on that. So we ended up spinning the team out into an entity in Dubai in September of last year. Took all the IP that we were working on and then launched Fathom in January. And yeah, I guess that sort of brings us up to date. So I'll give a little background on, what Fathom is and what we're really trying to do. But, the answer there is really we're trying to provide utility for tokenized real world assets. And we're doing that mainly through using them as collateral through our liquidity platform. So users can come and they can use either crypto, currently just XDC, or a tokenized asset. We're in the process of onboarding our first, which is going to be tokenized gold. You can use that as collateral to mint our stablecoin FXD. And then probably, the coolest thing after that is you can take those stablecoins. You can do anything you'd normally do with a stablecoin. Once you have liquidity, like go off and trade or buy other assets, but you can also access the Fathom vaults with it. Fathom vaults are pretty open-ended in terms of what they could be. We're going to start launching them based on specific trading strategies shortly. So it could be a single asset exposure, again, like gold. It could be multi-asset exposure like an ETF, or it could be something more advanced like a DeFi strategy or a traditional trading strategy as well. I think we'll end up probably launching some AI managed vaults as well. So once the really coolest feature here, and this actually started work back at S&P days, was trying to decentralize the ETF process. So once you deposit that stable coin into a vault, you get passed back an instantly minted share token. And that share token of the vault is basically a representation of your ownership of the underlying basket of assets or the underlying strategy in that vault. So then you can do two things with that. You can either multiply TVL and go back and use it as collateral to mint more stable coins, or you can take it to yet to be set up secondary markets. But I say yet to be set up because I think they're coming, and there's absolutely nothing that's going to stop that. We need some regulatory things in place, but there's already people working on this, and I think that'll go a long way to bootstrapping liquidity in the tokenization space overall. And I think that wraps it up. That's pretty much like the core components of Fathom. We also have a stable swap DEX and a borrowing and lending platform as well. But that example of moving from a collateral you own into a stable coin without losing the original exposure and then using it to gain additional exposure, I mean, this is quite novel, and it allows you to sort of leverage, let's say, your existing holdings to the max amount.
Darren, this interview is going to be totally up your alley. I know that 1,000%. I want to get just the intro from Quincy and from Lance here as well. But Quincy, if you could maybe tell the audience who you are, your role within the XDC ecosystem, that'd be fantastic. And welcome back, Quincy. It's been a little while since we've had you on a space. The man, the myth, the legend, and looking forward to seeing you guys down at Consensus as well.
Hey Solomon, really appreciate having me and being able to host these spaces and everything. And hey everybody, I'm Quincy. I'm a Solidity developer with the XDC Foundation. I help with not only development on the XDC network, but also with developer relations and being able to assist other developers with their development on the network. So yeah, that's me, and good to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. And Lance, would love if you could intro yourself to the audience here for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Lance. I work in ecosystem development for XDC Foundation. A little bit of that is working with Quincy, and also helping projects that are building on the network, and some communication stuff as well. So we'll be at Consensus working the booth and networking, and good to see you guys there too.
Darren, thank you, Lance. Darren, I saw your mic on mute, and I know you're chomping at the bit for this one, so feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Tyler about when you stake a real world asset, so let's say like home equity or something like that. I'm assuming that you have to over collateralize to get the stable coin. Like at what value do you have to over collateralize?
Yeah, great question. So, I think over collateralization is I think where we're at now. I think in terms of capital efficiency, it's, compared to traditional financial markets, not very capital efficient, but in terms of like being brand new for crypto, I think it's in quite a good place. And I think, I'll give you some key numbers, but I think we're going to move closer to 1-to-1 as this all evolves. And then it's, really a question of the underlying risk profile of the asset, right? So currently for taking XDC as collateral, we have the loan to value ratio to mint the stable set at 75%. So essentially that means it's 133% over collateralized. That's, I think pretty appropriate for a crypto asset. When we start onboarding gold and when we start onboarding treasuries, put any fixed income product maybe in this category, it's going to have a much different risk profile. So I think those things can be closer to 1-to-1. And then, when you consider BlackRock and BUIDL and some of these new funds getting set up by the likes of asset managers that are pretty much giving guarantees, that they'll foot the bill if there's a drawdown. I think that stuff's going to be exactly 1-to-1 or maybe even inverse under collateralized, but we'll see.
Tyler, I'm curious, since we just to kind of maybe dig a tiny bit deeper into the weeds here with the experience that you had within Securrency, and then which was acquired by DTCC and S&P Dow Jones indices, and there's obviously somebody that has your experience at these organizations. I guess I have a twofold question. Cool. Number one, within an organization that is as big as DTCC, so like pretty much global derivatives. Mm-hmm. We've seen some traction with those guys as far as like, testing out the technology. You can think of like Project Ion and Project Whitney and things like that. But how forward thinking is leadership at these organizations like a couple of years ago versus where you think that they're at right now would be, I guess, my first question. And then the second question is that there's obviously a market segment fit, I would assume, for what you guys are building with Fathom. Otherwise, you wouldn't build it based on all your experience at these organizations. So the second part of that question is, what kind of does the XDC network uniquely represent for your ability? Why did you choose to build within the XDC ecosystem, kind of as a start? And maybe those are two, because I will ramble and just ask you a 40-part question.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll start there. Yeah, so it's in terms of like leadership, it's in a much different place. When I was allowed to launch the group and then run the group at S&P, I mean, that was pretty much because I worked in the C-suite, since like 2015 or something, but I was always the crypto guy, right? So I was, talking to all these senior leaders about crypto, and some of them thought I was crazy, but a lot of them just wanted to make money. So they were listening. And then, that was kind of just like casual conversations over beers or coffee. And then in 2017, during that, really big bull run, there was sort of two sides. There were people who had a ton of animosity that, crypto people were making a ton of money and more than them. And then there was the faction that started listening, and they were like, oh, you've been talking about this for years. Why don't you go start a group? Like I said, once clients started calling. So that time period, 2017 to 2020, 2021, that was like really just all education, right? You had to educate senior leaders, you had to educate sales staff. I would say the difference between then and now is that there's not so much, there's still massive amounts of education that need to be done, but you're seeing more and more firms already have like the baseline understanding of why tokenization is important. And why crypto, will succeed going forward. Not to say again that there's not a lot of work to done, but I think there's a big mindset shift. In 2017, 18, it was like, is this thing ever going to amount to fruition? And now it's kind of like generally accepted by anyone who's got, above a base level of knowledge. So I think that's probably the biggest difference there. I'll hate a little bit on all these like big brand name pilots. I've been a part of them, a lot of them in the past, and, they pretty much never amount to anything. This is because incumbents can move as slow as possible, and, they have everything to gain by moving as slow as possible because they squeeze out the innovators, in conjunction with regulators. But I think this is opening up as well. And I think, we're going to see a time period where they're sort of forced to move a lot quicker. But just anecdotally talking to some blockchains and some other like parties within the past few weeks, they're pretty much all like of the same mindset. We're done with these brand name pilots. These banks never put these into production. And that's distinctly different from like what BlackRock's doing, which is actually putting money and, substance behind what they're saying publicly. So I'll leave it at that. I won't hate too much on the pilot projects. I guess you need them to some extent. I'm just sort of jaded about them. The next question, in terms of XDC, I was, a pretty early XDC holder. I think I was, from day one, held XDC to varying degrees throughout the years. So they were on my radar. And then a lot of what I was hearing at the time, at Currency when we started this project was basically like demand for private subnets. And maybe that's a good, separate discussion for later, but XDC was, I believe, the first network to actually have private subnets. So we were sort of exclusively looking at networks that could handle that. And then trade finance was already on my radar as a number one use case for tokenization. So, that focus on tokenized real world assets, going after a niche market that I thought would be a first mover along with subnets, really provided the foundation to, I think, do everything that we needed to do, in terms of building. And then, going back to trade finance, I mean, it's not going to be like one chain rules them all. So, I've always been of the mindset we're trying to put, over $100 trillion of capital markets on chain. I think it makes sense that, specific blockchains pick specific niche markets and go after those. Because I don't think it's going to be like, one chain does everything, right?
Yep.
Darren, go ahead.
So you mentioned that you're an econ nerd. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on like the economic value this would have by being able to borrow against pretty much like any illiquid asset that you own. Like most people own homes and have car equity or gold or whatever type of investment. So if you're able to get some liquidity from all of that, like what type of economic value would that have?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking about, at minimum hundreds, specifically with the assets you mentioned, and maybe there's some difficulty with home equity, but certainly there's some projects, and I've pitched projects before trying to go, put home equity into tokens and then use that as collateral. But cars work, other things work as well. But yeah, you're talking about like, in those two examples, which I think are a good one for retail folks, probably most of their wealth is trapped in those two items. So you're talking about them getting liquidity out of their two biggest investments for the first time in history. And they're really just taking part in what, high net worth individuals have had access to for the entire history of the financial system, which is, private loans against their assets. So it's sort of like a level playing field moment. But I mean, at minimum, you're probably talking, at least low trillions of dollars of liquidity that could come back into markets. So it's, essentially a way to like, I could see it being a big stimulus to the economy with without injecting more supply into the money supply. But yeah, I think it would be a watershed moment, man. Stuff like that, I think is why, not just me, but everyone's in DeFi or crypto.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And I mean, like, hopefully people are able to take advantage of those opportunities, right?
Yeah, definitely. And then, another example too, that's, more crypto native is like, you think about the big holders on networks, whether they're the founders, whether they're the validators, whatever. I mean, these people have most of their net worth in an asset that they don't necessarily want to sell either. So you can think about, the example I just gave for the US or global economy, applying to specific blockchains, once we're able to provide liquidity for those assets that they hold. Or stake to masternodes, for instance. Same thing, it's basically like a liquidity explosion moment. Yeah.
I wanted to add one thing in real quick with that too, is I was having a conversation with someone about how, crypto assets and digital assets aren't necessarily recognized as, value that you can consider part of your net worth or whatever, right? For trying to get a mortgage or getting a loan, et cetera, et cetera. But, you can use those as collateral and get something that is considered, for your net worth or whatever that you could use for loans. Like that also unlocks a lot of opportunity.
That is definitely a good example, Lance. I actually haven't thought about that. That's funny, right? You could like shift your crypto holdings into your bank account for a couple of days to get a loan and then go back. I'm sure you'd get better terms if you did that. That's funny.
I'm curious. People probably have a lot of their worth in crypto anyway, so
yeah,
or a lot of people do.
Definitely.
I'm curious. You mentioned initially with Fathom kind of the private subnet aspects that were available, and we had the ability to talk to Andre Casterman. I think that was last week, right after Tim Draper, talking about trade tech and trade finance and kind of like meaningful compliance. I would love to get your take on, traditional institutions. I'm just giving an example. Like when we actually do have regulatory clarity, and there's levels of compliance and certain levels of like privacy. I don't know if that's going to come through the zero knowledge stuff or digital identity stuff, all this stuff. What reasons would the banking, traditional financial institutions, the banking industry, what reasons would they not have to come on chain and actually start leveraging liquidity on chain? Once all this stuff's kind of baked in and the regulatory stuff gets flushed out, everything else, I mean, do you expect that there's really no way that these organizations and institutions don't come on chain?
Yeah, man, I'm definitely a believer that they all come on chain. I mean, I'll give, I guess, a couple anecdotal examples. So, I mean, I guess part of this, and I'll set the stage with, why I think DeFi needs to exist in a retail capacity now. And I think that's to actually like fight to install some changes that are probably more equitable, especially for retail holders before there's this full transition. Because if we leave the full transition to just banks, they're going to build things that are the best for banks. And, there's plenty of ways to screw retail in that build out. So I'm hoping DeFi can move fast enough over the next few years to actually create some changes that filter into these institutional systems as well. But, I sort of see them sitting side by side. Fathom is not, it's retail and institutional focus, but the basic tool work could be completely put on a private subnet and gate kept or use digital identities so that institutions want to use it. The big thing and why an institution would go public versus private is probably because they want to obscure some of their trading activity. And I don't mean that in an illegal sense. I mean, like, this is how things work, and banks don't want other banks seeing all of their trading behavior because they think they have an edge. So yeah, I mean, I sort of see this hybrid system erupting. Why I think it's completely inevitable basically comes down to cost savings. And this goes back to my first point. There's a lot of altruistic components to crypto and to DeFi, and I think we need to fight for these. But increasingly, what I feel, is like the actual transition, meaning including getting government in line, which, you can see pretty much these asset managers moving the needle there. Doing that pretty much means that institutions need to be saving money. And I'll give a specific example of here that should give you an idea of why it's inevitable. At Securrency, we did a project where we were just putting their SEC lending business, so securities lending business, which pretty much you could think of like a CDP, like what Fathom does for high net worth individuals, just over the counter. So just doing that one business in a DeFi architecture, and we could go in and use a no-code tool to have business analysts with no coding experience deploy their own modules within like 2 days, let's say, which is massively quicker than what exists now. The cost savings estimated annually just off that one business line was $1 billion. So a bank saving $1 billion on one revenue line, and that's just automating one component of it. When you have, pricing that's on chain, feeding automated asset management protocols, things like this that institutions use, like you're talking about tens and tens of billions of cost savings annually across all institutions, probably quite a bit more than that. So that's why I think it becomes completely ubiquitous. It's definitely going to take a while to get to ubiquitous, but we're at the beginning right now, in my opinion.
Darren?
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering about like the quality of real world assets that get put into the vault. So you're accepting real world assets, and in exchange you give them either a stable coin or you give them a portion of the fund, right? So I mean, like in crypto, there's like synthetic assets where, there's no underlying stock. It's just like kind of an oracle that's tracking the price of a stock. So like you would have to be really careful because you need to be able to collect the underlying. So I'm just kind of wondering how you go about vetting the different real world assets.
Yeah, definitely. So, in terms of like quality, we're only going after assets that are, high quality, meaning like their rating in traditional markets would be maybe BBB plus or above. And then we're starting off, pretty unrisky, right? We're talking about gold, we're talking about treasuries, we're talking about other fixed income products, whether it's corporate or sovereign bonds. And then I hope we get more into equities and big index funds and things like that. To answer the second part of your question, and I don't think I covered this in vaults, but like the vault strategy can invest in two different ways, right? It can invest in off-chain assets. And then I told you it mints a share token. So it's essentially a way to create an instant derivative for off-chain assets that haven't been tokenized on chain yet. So this is like one of the real novel pieces about vaults, but it can also invest in on-chain tokenized assets, which is really the ultimate goal. It's just that first part is sort of instrumental in bootstrapping. And then, I basically see vaults being baskets of tokenized goods. And then ownership when it's tokenized, and everything is on chain, that ownership transfer is like much easier, making that or ensuring that happens is pretty easy to code. And anytime we'd be managing off-chain assets, we're talking about working with, licensed or regulated asset manager. So I don't think it's a big concern there either. So we're not just minting synthetics. That's, not really what we do. Even though you can think of the share tokens like a derivative on an asset.
I'm curious to ask, we're very kind of deep into the real world asset, assets being tokenized. And you look at the XDC network right now, whether it's, the tokenized treasuries and securities tokenization through yield tech, or even looking at the SBI XDC, APAC aspects and securitize, like maybe if you could give your insight on some of the stuff that we're kind of witnessing, because I feel like Darren and I have talked about this before, like if you look at these different ecosystems, XDC certainly being one of them, any of these announcements for real world adoption that we're seeing now almost on a weekly basis, 3 or 4 years ago would have totally driven the entire narratives of what's going on in digital assets for like an entire 6-month tranche of time.
Yeah.
So if you could maybe just touch base on what we're actually seeing from real world adoption right now compared to where we were at, and maybe like Yield Tech, the SBI aspects, like some of the other institutions, that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely, man. So, I mean, I think, what you're referencing in terms of like news-driven narrative or narrative-driven news relating to price. I mean, I think of like a bell curve, and I think, the flat front end is probably where we were the past couple of years, and now we're starting to ramp up. So I think, impactful news is going to have a shorter cycle because there's going to be a lot more people and a lot more news from each chain themselves. So I think that's just sort of like a natural progression. I think in terms of XDC making themselves an option on Securitize is absolutely massive. They're certainly in good company when you look at the other chains that are an option to tokenize on. And that's fantastic. I mean, Securitize is one of the biggest inventory producers for tokenized RWA that exists, right? And it makes XDC, an option. What we're trying to do with XDC is essentially incentivize people who are going through these big inventory producers to want to use XDC by providing, first of its kind utility through DeFi, right? So if you go to Securitize and maybe you don't know XDC, or XDC, but Avalanche or some other chain better, okay. But then you're going to basically be, you're going to look at the options of what you can do with that asset on each chain, and Fathom exists on XDC. And you're like, okay, well, if I mint on XDC, I can go use this thing as collateral. I can take out liquidity via stable coins. I can further invest in vaults. And this is sort of like, the operational underlying of, what we're trying to do with Fathom is build this utility. And it exists on XDC first. But yeah, it's big win for the chain to get on Securitize, in my opinion. They won't be the only inventory producer, but there's sort of like a big 3 or 4 globally. But there's going to be more and more. And I think, just like I said, certain chains will have niches. I think certain inventory producers will sort of dominate issuance in certain geographical regions.
Totally. No, I even outside of like the speculation for price and all the other stuff that just naturally occurs. I think I was more trying to allude to like the biggest announcement that I can remember in 2018 was like Lipton rebranding to Lipton blockchain. And like we're sitting here in 2024, and there's like tons of like actual initiatives that are like going like actually going live with like adoption of the technology, which is just really crazy to see.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's just, things are moving quicker now, in terms of adoption. So I think, it's just a product of that.
It's funny because like DTCC is kind of just a big database of stocks, right? But and they're exploring different blockchain technologies, but you can really just issue stocks directly onto something like XDC and just host a website and kind of sell your stock if you were the business owner. And I mean, like most people don't have access to capital formation like in the rest of the world, right? So it's just funny to me to see like DTCC exploring something that could kind of get rid of the whole purpose of DTCC.
Well, yeah, that's why they're exploring it. That's a good observation. The same thing exists within the custodian banking system, and why those big banking shops, whether it was State Street or Bank of New York, became early crypto adopters. That's because the first major use case that was really getting publicized was instant peer-to-peer payments that settled, without a multi-day delay. Okay, well, when you settle assets without a multi-day delay, that takes away the core business of some of the biggest banks on earth. And they were lucky enough to have some people in high places who realized that very early. So those banks got in very quickly. And, I think you could say the same about DTCC. We're building tools that make most of the incumbents completely irrelevant unless the incumbents themselves adopt these tools. And, that'll be a stage we go through for sure. And, I think you're seeing, the very beginning of that. And that's sort of like back to my point of what I meant with like, DeFi's purpose right now is to hopefully create enough valuable change for, retail and the community at large that it filters into those institutional platforms that are, copies of crypto or whatever you'd like to call it.
I'm curious, Tyler, from your stance, like obviously a lot of what we're talking about comes down to, and like we mentioned, empowering normal citizens, like everyday people, for kind of the first time ever. And this might be a question for you, Tyler, and probably for Quincy. How important does it then become to make sure that the user experience is totally nailed out within the the applications or the primitives that you guys are building, and how does kind of education tie into all this stuff?
Yeah, so education is definitely a massive piece of this. Going back to the S&P days, I mean, I essentially had to convince every C-suite leader that the business they built, which was ETFs, and those people I was working for built that business from the ground up, that basically the same thing that they did to mutual funds via technological improvement was going to happen to them via tokenization if they didn't adopt it. So got quite good at, both pitching with an educational message. But yeah, education's massive, man. And DeFi as it exists now is quite difficult by Web 2.0 standards to use. So, I think there's going to be a lot of advancements in that phase. We are going to start leaning on AI for this. We just made our first head of AI hire, super knowledgeable guy. We have a AI veteran advisor. He's been in the space for 35 years. And then we're a part of a Web3 AI accelerator. So yeah, I think we're going to start using AI, not just for like increasing like capital efficiency and making the liquidation mechanics much more functional, or portfolio management additionally. But I think we'll start using it to sort of simplify the user experience in DeFi as well. When you think about some of like the DeFi trading strategies, like it takes so much time to actually invest, and probably some losses as well, to figure out how that works. So if we can, install some type of like guided prompt system, or even like lay that strategy into a vault where someone just deposits a coin and doesn't even worry about it, but then the strategy is AI driven, I think that'll be quite helpful. But yeah, there's still a ton of education, that needs to happen. That's, why I'm always happy to do Twitter spaces or, any speaking events.
Yeah, and I see that you guys are putting instructional videos out already for the vault aspects and everything else, which is really cool. I think it's like crucial to try to educate people as much as you possibly can. Quincy, I'm curious your thoughts from the development standpoint around kind of the importance of user experience and how you kind of bake that into to when you're trying to actually, build some of these aspects of the network.
Yeah, I think user experience is key. I think for the longest time in crypto, there's been a relatively high barrier to entry, simply just mostly based off that experience component that we stated earlier. But also just even with that experience, or even with that education, um, there's still this barrier of entry that's not as seamless as like logging in with your Google account, or logging in with your Apple account, maybe, or being able to interact with multiple different types of applications. And it's close to being there, but I think right now that's one of the biggest barriers keeping like a good saturation of users from joining like Web3. I think as we build out like more flushed out products, and we start moving away from just protocols, because right now we see a lot of protocols, whether it's from layer ones, layer twos, oracles, um, whatever. As we start seeing more products be flushed out on top of these protocols, I think we'll see the user experience become a lot easier and a lot simpler. And it's sort of the same way as like when the internet first came around. Like for the longest time, like being on the internet was like for nerds back in like the 90s. But you could almost look at it as like smartphones almost created a way for the average person to be on the internet, to the point now to where everybody's on the internet like all the time. And it's stuff like that. It's innovations like that that allow new technologies to be widely adopted.
I want to ask you guys kind of from both ends of the spectrum here. From Fathom standpoint, I see that you guys have made a pretty interesting partnership, and this just came out yesterday. But if you can get into some of the milestones that you guys have had so far, Tyler, from Fathom standpoint, that'd be great.
Yeah, totally. I think the best is yet to come. In terms of like additional partnerships that aren't announced, I'm not gonna go into that, but there's definitely some really, really massive stuff at work. Essentially we're trying to align with, all the inventory producers that are in different geographical locations globally to become, if not the first, one of their first options to provide utility for their assets. Milestone wise, we hit $3 million of issuance in the stable coin, I think a week or two ago. This is, pretty huge. I think the all-time high TVL was 7.5, which when you look at XDC TVL is, quite high, especially for a brand new project. We just announced a partnership with Kima yesterday. Kima is a cross-chain liquidity layer. So essentially like, for every dollar that exists on chain, they can provide like $10 of liquidity. And again, this moves cross-chain. So we're quite excited about that partnership. Let me think. I think all of our, milestone is definitely that all of our modules are built in live. So vaults are running, the CDP is up, the DEX is up, borrowing and lending is up. I think the next big milestone that'll be coming over the next few weeks that we can, talk about because it went to a DAO vote is the onboarding of Comtech Gold. So if you hold Comtech Gold, which is a tokenized gold product, you can access the CDP via that. And then I think the other good milestone, this was really early days when we just had the CDP spun up, but we ran, I think, like 10 different trade finance liquidity pools with FXD, our stable coin. So you could basically go bring FXD, drop it into a liquidity pool. That liquidity pool's assets, which are stable coins, would basically be used to finance trade finance deals. And then you as an LP would get pass back returns from that trade finance deal. So we were running through a third party Trade Finex for a bit, but we're going to start onboarding those companies to vaults. So you'll have like basically a vault sponsored by, for example, Trade Flow Capital that's got a certain percentage return based on their trade receivables, and you can LP into that vault and then get access to those underlying returns. So yeah, you'll definitely see vaults start springing up more and more. Gold will have a vault. Various trade finance companies will have their own vault. And then, we might get more advanced in sort of like mixing and matching those into multi-asset vaults, maybe similar to like a structured product.
Do you need to have like a strategy for a stablecoin adoption, or does it just kind of take care of itself as you just ensure that the stablecoin is actually a buck for the buck?
Yeah, it's funny, man. When you're building the stablecoin platform, your absolute biggest concern is how do we keep this thing, relatively stably pegged. Once you launch the stablecoin, if you've done everything proper, it's completely switches 180 to the entire focus is really on business development around that stablecoin. So no, man, there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, in terms of trying to get that stable coin in as many places as possible. We'll have some new SEX listings coming up. We'll have new integrations coming up for the stable coin. But really, I think that, the biggest one is, again, the utility factor. So if you want to use tokenized assets to gain liquidity, you're going to be going through our stable, but, you're basically trying to put enough like sort of tentacles or cast a big enough net that your stable coin has, value to people. People need to want to use your stable coin versus some of the others.
You mentioned the kind of just the probably the bureaucracy that's in place at somewhere like DTCC with the different kind of segments of like people with beliefs, whether blockchain is going to be adopted or blockchain's not, like over the past couple of years. But then, from the trade finance company standpoint, it seems like there might be more willingness, or is there more forward-thinking leadership? Because obviously associating a product, I would assume associates the brand kind of. Is there a little bit more trust in that regard? Or if you could maybe just touch base on it, that'd be cool.
Yeah, totally. let me see if I answer this right. So, at any big corporate entity, everyone is sort of concerned about their own tiny kingdom, of which digital assets is going to be one. So there's always these competing factions of people, and you're basically relying on the person who runs the digital asset team to be the best political employee at that company. And I've seen many banks where maybe that person lost the battle and then the digital asset team closed, only to be restarted later. This has happened at a few firms. But, I think that's just sort of the nature of the beast in terms of the corporate world. Could you remind me what the second part of the question was?
I guess just the onboarding process with different trade finance companies that versus a DTCC adoption. Like, is there more willingness at kind of the individual company level?
Yeah, definitely. So, using trade finance as a specific example, SMEs, small and medium trade finance companies can't get financing through banks. So they're super eager to explore alternative financing methods, meaning, via DeFi, because it's, one of their only options. And if they can start reliably using DeFi for trade financing, that means they can increase their business. If you're talking to a large entity or a super large entity who has, guaranteed bank financing for all their deals, then they're not going to need to be a first mover. So for them, it's really about balancing, they're going to keep an eye on these small players that are going to be first adopters. And I think this, applies to any area of crypto, right? And I'll give another example in a minute. The smaller players are always going to be the first adopters, and then the incumbents, are basically judging how long can I let this ride before I also need to do this. But by their nature, they're big. It's like turning a cruise ship versus turning a sailboat. That's the major difference. So it's a much bigger undertaking to redo all this legacy infrastructure at a massive financial firm than it is to just swap out your current infrastructure at a small firm. Another place this applies is like the ETF or asset manager side of the business. So the people who are, before BlackRock, the people who are most interested in tokenization of their ETFs were the middle of the table, bottom of the table in terms of total AUM, right? The big guys, I've had talks with all of them, and I'll give a funny anecdotal comment from BlackRock in a minute. They weren't as concerned, but the people who were like losing market share to the BlackRocks and Vanguards of the world, and had decent size, they were first adopters. And I think that's just a natural thing in any market. Now that you have BlackRock wading in, clearly you're seeing the biggest organization essentially make a judgment call that now is the time, and they think it's real enough to the point where if they don't wade in, they're going to start losing market share to upstarts or smaller people. The funny comment from BlackRock was talking to their head of digital assets in like 2018, 2017, I can't recall. And I was talking to him about tokenization. We were talking about crypto ETFs, so ETFs with crypto exposure. But, I was at that point like pretty heavily pitching tokenization, right? We were trying to guard our biggest revenue line, which was index provisioning for ETFs, right? So we need to make sure when ETFs turn to tokenized funds that we still have that same market share hold. And BlackRock's comments back to me were basically like, look, we're already sold on tokenization, but it's going to happen in 2024, 2025. And I was like, at the time, I was like, you got to be kidding me that you're telling me this is 6 or 7 years out. That seems, hard to fathom to me. But then, here we are in 2024 and they're right on schedule. So these things are planned, many years in advance. I'll leave you with, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting, Darren. I know you've got something, but I know Darren and I used to do a lot of deep dives into the SWIFT system and all sorts of stuff as far as payments are concerned. And if you look at any of the roadmaps, they're all 2024, 2025, certain things, and then 2030, certain things. I mean, but yeah, it's interesting. And you look at kind of the, I don't know, years that some of these, even just proof of concepts that you probably saw 3, 4, 5 years ago. Yeah. Some of that stuff just starting to kind of go live now. Darren, I know you had something. Sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to I wanted to ask if you're optimistic about regulations because of regulatory capture and the incumbents. Like, do you think if it's really poses a threat that they could just kind of throw roadblocks in the way with the laws?
Yeah, so I mean, you're sort of seeing the result of them trying to work in a very backdoor fashion in terms of like, okay, regulators are clearly politicized and they're clearly in the pockets of big institutions who are the incumbents and they don't want new people coming in and overthrowing their business. So they lean on regulators to, basically work in the unscrupulous fashion that they have been the past few years. That being said, like I'm pretty bullish, and we had a good vote yesterday. We're seeing it become more of a bipartisan issue in the U.S., which is great. Also, more of the incumbents are getting ready to move, which means things should open up as well. That being said, like I spend a lot of time globally, not in the U.S., and the rest of the world does not care what the U.S. is doing. There's not like a single country on earth, whether it's Asia or the Middle East or even really Europe, that really is looking to US for guidance anymore. I think the way they think about crypto and their regulations now are like, okay, if we have an open framework, we can do what the US did to the internet and draw a lot of business to our, country, our region, which is a massive opportunity. So, I mean, like, talking to entities in the UAE, talking to entities in Hong Kong that tokenize securities, they already have regulatory approval to move those assets into Web3. And then there are companies that, are saying this is available as an option in the US in the very near future as well, which, of course I'm bullish on. But I'm definitely like of the mindset that people need to be innovating on their own, trying to build something that's novel and different and benefits users as opposed to, just following regulation and letting that guide crypto, because that's not going to result in a system that's any better than what we have now. And it's probably going to result in something worse.
I was reading that your co-founder, Manuel, was interviewed maybe like a month or so ago. And he was asked just the super, low-hanging fruit question here, but I'm curious your take on this. So looking ahead, this is the exact question he was asked. Looking ahead, what valuation do you predict for the RWA ecosystem in the coming years? I would love your thoughts on this because, we hear different ranging things. Everything's going to be tokenized versus, it's kind of a fad. And I think that we can kind of see the writing on the wall now, but I'm curious from your standpoint, Tyler, if you could tackle that low-hanging fruit question.
Yeah, man. So, I mean, I'm definitely of the mindset that everything or most things get tokenized. I used to think that by now we would have a much, much further progress than we do. I still think that, by 2020, 30, we'll have a big chunk of assets. I mean, I'm sure most people have seen that Boston Consulting Group report that says 16 trillion in assets in their graph. But that's their conservative model, and their more free running model, they estimate 68 trillion by 2030. That's hard for me to imagine. The entire ETF market's only like 8 or 9 trillion at its height, 9 trillion at its height. But maybe there's like 110 or 115 of easily tokenizable, 110, 115 trillion of easily tokenizable capital market assets. I think if we get to 10 trillion by 2030, this would be a big challenge, but also a big win. That's sort of my benchmark, is to be somewhere that's level-ish with ETFs by 2030.
I want to ask everybody here, because I know we're ramping down, Quincy and Lance, from the XDC ecosystem standpoint, what are some of the more notable achievements that you guys have had recently? I know that the accelerator program has been launched through Tenity. And then what are you guys looking forward to in the future? That'd be fantastic.
Quincy, you want to take it, or I'll take it first? Or
Lance, yeah, you can go first.
All right. I think as far as achievements, with Securitize and USTY was a big deal. And I think the reason why it was more exciting was not necessarily because it was with Securitize and it's actually, real world adoption, et cetera, but it brought more attention to what XDC Network has been, or the teams building on XDC Network have been trying to do. for the past few years. So it's created a limelight on that. The teams around XDC Network have been focused on trade finance, and I think that's something that's going to become more popular as people come into the industry. But I'm really excited about the network upgrade. We've been talking about it for quite some time now, but the audit was just complete for 2.0, and we're working through that at the moment, or the protocol team is, and so we're close. 2.0 is upon us. It's coming soon. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and for me, some of the new things that I'm excited for, not only tokenization, but also subnets and where subnets are going to fit in the XDC ecosystem. I say that because also with like 2.0 and a bunch of other things, I think it's going to provide a whole new set of tokenization services, and a whole new set of technologies that can facilitate those services. And I think it's going to be like a really big thing that doesn't necessarily get as much attention as it deserves. But as you start seeing more of these institutions, and as you start seeing a lot of different technology or a lot of different companies adopt these technologies, I think that's going to be something to look forward to.
Does it make just curious from my stance, Quincy? So having the subnet aspects, does it make building on XDC a little bit more about user or institution choice and like more modular in a way, like where you can do certain things on a certain subnet that just fit kind of the almost like the onboarding of traditional businesses into Web3, so real world businesses actually like living on chain?
Yeah, I think subnets are going to act as a bit of a gateway for institutions to sort of merge their Web2 environments into a Web3 environment. I think you're going to start seeing them deploy the first of their contracts in these private or in these subnet environments first, before they start moving on to some of these main chains. But I think the primary thing that is going to be very interesting is they're going to act as this gateway. And the reason I say that is a lot of people sort of just assume that, oh, everyone's just going to adopt blockchain and just start deploying everything on chain. And maybe a lot of new startups do that. But there's a lot of different things that come in between what services being provided on chain and the adopting the technology and integrating the technology to do that. So subnets acts as a really good middle layer to where they can start adopting a lot of the EVM technology and a lot of the blockchain technology stack. But they can do it in a private environment, and they can start getting into tokenization and start getting into managing and building out their contracts, and then start moving those contracts and those applications and those tokens into the mainnet environment. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really good access for that new sort of wave of tokenization.
And then Tyler, I always like to ask if we might have missed anything. It's been really awesome having you on today. I mean, such a wealth of knowledge. But if we missed anything, feel free to tackle that for us. And if not, would love some forward-looking statements for you, whether it's on Fathom and where you guys are kind of headed, or just industry-wide as a whole. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, definitely, man. No, I think you did a great job of sort of canvassing the entire landscape of what's going on. Something I think that I'll just give, one more bit of attention to is that, tokenization has been around for a while. It's yet to really fulfill any of the promises, but, what I'm seeing now is basically through things like Fathom and through what the inventory producers are working towards, which is creating securities tokens that can actually move into Web3. We're sort of at this first utility moment for tokenized real world assets. So despite being in it for so many years, this is probably like the most exciting time to be in it, quite honestly. I'm truly a believer that this is going to be the tipping point. So, we're basically looking to DeFi to leverage their existing market of users and volume, bring tokenized real world assets there, and then provide utility through protocols like Fathom. And this is really like, I think we're weeks to months away of this really starting to happen. And, once there's some first movers, I think everyone's got to move that way. So it could happen quite quick.
To piggyback off that a little bit, right? I mean, you always hear about these great benefits of tokenization all the time, but not necessarily how people can actually leverage it themselves and use that. And, quite a few teams on the network, Fathom, one, is really focused on that. How do we get people to actually start using this and it not just be, securitize or financial institutions, et cetera, right? I think for it to really blow up, like we have to create the ability for it to empower people to take advantage of the technology as well. And I think that's happening, on XDC, not just XDC, some others as well, but here there's some good teams that are really focused on that. And I think that's really going to help, not only the technology progress and move forward, but the XDC network as well. And for what Fathom's doing, and then even around trade finance, there's more tools out there, more projects that are focused on getting people involved in trade finance, SMEs, et cetera. And I'm excited to see where that progresses as well. So XDC Network's always been very utility focused. Well, the people that are building on the network have been, and you're really seeing that come to fruition. And 2.0 is just going to make the network and layer one that everybody's sort of built upon even better and more trusted and more secure, so that institutions, et cetera, can actually come in and start, using the blockchain as well. So it's exciting times. I think the pace at which these things are moving along is picking up a little bit. So it's exciting times.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lance. Well, I have to say, I really appreciate everybody's time today. I know how busy everybody is. Tyler, it has been awesome having the opportunity to interview you through Fathom. I'm really excited to kind of watch all of the innovation start to come to fruition. You mentioned it's going to happen much sooner rather than later, so it'll be cool to witness. Feel free to give the Fathom guys a follow for those listening down here below. Quincy, thank you so much, sir. Always appreciate you coming on. Lance, thank you so much. Really excited about 2.0 within the XDC ecosystem, and looking forward to seeing you guys down at Consensus. And Darren, always do such a great job. I've Tyler, you could probably tell, and everybody else up here, Darren is super into the weeds with all the technical questions, so it is a blessing to have Darren up here on some of these panels. So hey, that being said, guys, really appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you guys. And Tyler, feel free to come back on whenever you guys have cool initiatives that are going live. Would love to have you again.
Yeah, happy to chat, man. Anytime. Thanks for having me on today.
All right, guys, we will see you guys next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, guys.